Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Ben Anderson. I'm a regional director with Extension in our Northwest region based in Moorhead. Thanks for joining us tonight for our 7th Local Foods College session for this year. Our topic tonight is scaling up for marketing, vegetable benchmarking, and engaging economic development. Our presenters are two of our Extension Community Economics educators. First is Ryan Pesch. He is based out of our Moorhead office as well. And our other presenter tonight is Merritt Bussiere, and he is based out of our Brainerd office. A couple things before I turn it over to Ryan. We have you all muted right now. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat section. And if it's something specific to a point that Ryan or Merritt make, I'll interrupt them and ask that right away. Otherwise, they will be alternating between each other throughout the hour tonight. And if it's more of a general question, I'll just wait until that break comes up when they switch. We will also have at the very end, just some time for any other general questions or last-minute questions as well. At that time, if you want to unmute and just ask your question verbally, you can do that as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan, and we'll get started.
Okay, you hear me right, Ben?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay, very good. All right, as Ben said, I'm Ryan Pesch. Some of you around this local food stuff, you probably see too much of me. So here I am again. I pop up like a bad penny all the time. Our topic for tonight was titled Scaling Up for Marketing. I think we really wanted to call it Scaling Up for Markets, thinking that a number of people are maybe just at that point that are on here to say, geez, could I do some of this stuff commercially? And so basically we're going to go through some research that we had done in the Central region around farm finances of vegetable production, which I think will be pretty helpful to you. It's been my experience in local foods college and places like this that a lot of people that are going to go commercial oftentimes go commercial with an enterprise like a vegetable enterprise, which cash flows a little more quicker than some other types of enterprises like dairy or livestock. So I'll go first here, and I'll get into the benchmarks. Talk about how to apply them, and then I turn it over to Merritt, who's going to talk about the economic impact part of the project. So forgive me if I think this is the exact same slide that I'd used last time. It's an oldie but goodie, so I just said, well, just keep using the darn thing. When we're thinking about this project and thinking about our work, we see very similar issues that come up again and again around whether anybody can make any kind of money doing this. There's a lot of excitement around and growth around farmers markets, CSAs, these kinds of things. We see, I got 2 citations here from the New York Times. One is about new and beginning growers. We see a lot of that, new growers, prospective growers. And, you know, this week I'm going to go down to Moses. I run into a lot of new and prospective growers down at that neck of the woods. But also, you know, just last year, New York Times ran this article on don't let your children grow up to be farmers. So even though there's a lot of excitement around kind of the local food movement and new growers and such, they were trying to point out that, you know, for all of our, no matter how excited we are, there's still these financial issues. Even though a lot of people get involved, they might not really be making it. And so that really leads is good context to kind of where the local food movement is and kind of where our project fits in on that, because we really try to dig into the numbers and get a sense about, are people making money on growing vegetables commercially, and especially at the small scale? And if so, what are some tools that we can create that allow other people that are new as prospective growers to use that information to do some basic business planning? So our objectives to create these financial benchmarks for small commercial horticulture operations. Overall in Minnesota, we've had some access to data through FinBin, but oftentimes those have been some of the larger commercial horticulture operations. So we were looking at those vegetable operations that did 12 acres or less of mixed vegetables. Second with that is there's a lot of this conversation about to what extent are local food operations contributing to the local economy. This is what Merritt's going to talk about in the second half of the presentation. And as we were collecting data on farm finances, we also asked a group of growers about where they got their different inputs that they use on their operation, and whether those things were sourced locally or non-locally. So were people buying seeds locally, or were they buying a mail order from outside of the region? We did this analysis in order to get a feel for to what extent, as these local food operations grow, that those economic activities will spill over to the bigger economy. So it's kind of an economic question. Hopefully that didn't get too heady. We had an extension team that worked on this. Just a quick introduction. It's sort of where Community Vitality and Merritt and I and our colleague Bridget, who works on economic impact work, sort of meets with the agricultural side of Extension. So also on our team were two local educators, Beth Berlin, Morrison, Stearns County, as well as Randy Nelson, who's works in Clay County. And we were advised and helped out by Rob Holcomb, who does a lot of farm business management work and is based out of Marshall. Okay. And just a little heads up, because a lot of times, you know, I say I'm an extension educator and people always think I deal with ag or 4-H. Merritt and I are both in this on the community economics team that you heard Ben introduce us as. There are 7 of us across the state in our different service territories. And I work throughout all west central Minnesota, and Merritt there's in the Brainerd Regional Office working in the central region. We do a lot of programming really that's on the community side of economic development. So we do everything from e-marketing workshops to business retention expansion efforts, survey research, a lot of market analysis for communities. Oftentimes I always say I'm playing in a spreadsheet to figure out whether a community can have 2 restaurants instead of 1. Some things, these kinds of questions are some of the things that we end up dealing with. On the Moodle site is actually a couple links about the Center for Community Vitality, if you kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about some of the stuff that we do. But for this project, we did delve into some farm finances, and that's typically another part of Extension that works on that. We did have an advisory committee for this project. I think a good mix of people in the region, outside the region, that work statewide, including Kathy Zeman with Minnesota Farmers Market Association, but also Arlene Jones and Lisa Baker from the Central Region. Arlene sort of organizes the Sprout Food Hub that some of you might know of. It really initiated some of this interest into, you know, what is the economic spillover of our producers, the people that sell to our food hub in this region. She thinks, hey, boy, well, I think we are making good contributions to our local economy, but are we? So how do we measure that? Also, Lisa Baker, who's an operator in Stearns County, and she also does some coordination for the Sustainable Farming Association in the Central Region. Also, Molly Zins, who is the Central RSDP, or Central Regional Sustainable Development Partnership Director, who works a fair amount in local foods in the Central Region. All this was funded by the EDA Center at Crookston. So, boy, that's kind of a long introduction just to get to this, get to the meat of the presentation here, but here we go. So as far as the presentation, I'm going to go over some of these financial returns that we saw based on our study. We're going to look at sales, what are those expenses, what is the overall return to their work. We're also going to look at returns to labor in terms of estimates about how much time people are taking to do a mixed vegetable operation or mixed vegetable enterprise, and talk about kind of what are they earning on a per hour basis. And then again, Merritt's going to talk about the economic impact part and how we can kind of change that model a little bit to better represent small producers like we were working with. Study methods, we did data collection on people's 2014 farm season. So we met directly with producers and basically went through their books with them in detail. We aggregated all that data and we created these benchmarks after we took the data from all the participants and put it together and found those averages and medians or media for for different expenses and revenues for the whole group. So we got data for each individual farm, and then we created these benchmarks for the whole group. That makes sense. We also did a lot of follow-up with those participants, or a little bit of follow-up with those participants to say, okay, this is how you compare to the other people like you. This has changed your business a little bit, or make you think differently about your business. And lastly, we put this all together in a report, which was just recently published a few weeks ago. So it's just a 2-year study, and so we collected the data for 2014, and we're now getting started on collecting data from the same participants, as well as some new participants based on the 2014 farm finances. We do this in FinPac, and one thing that's really important that I take pretty seriously is we do this in confidence with those producers. People get a little bit squeamish, and understandably so, when talking about their individual business finances. And so it's absolutely important that they're assured that we're not talking about their own individual data with other people. And so that's something we take very seriously on the program team. And as you see, the data gets aggregated for the whole group, and that's the stuff that we present and talk about. And so I'll move on. So about our farm operations, we did get data for 11 farms from that central region. To the best of our, and this is within a 13-county area of central Minnesota. We're going from basically Hubbard County down to Douglas, Stearns, Benton County, up over towards Aiken, and back towards Becker and Hubbard County again. So that kind of larger 13-county area of central Minnesota. To the best of our ability of identifying commercial and vegetable productions that kind of fit our criteria for this project, we estimate there's about 65 farms that fit that criteria that are less than 12 acres of mixed vegetable production and direct market in the area. And so 11 of the 65, not too bad. We did have room to get up to 20 farms, and we still have funding to pay people to get involved in the study again this year for up to 20 farms. So all of them are commercial vegetable operations, but many of them do other enterprises. So to be clear, often we use the terms operation versus enterprise, where an operation is the farm, and the enterprise are the many different things, different kind of little businesses within that one farm operation. So for example, we would have some farms that would do a broiler enterprise and then a mixed vegetable enterprise. Those are two parts of their overall operation. So all of them did commercial horticulture and mixed vegetable enterprise, but the other enterprises did account for about 45% of total sales, so that they weren't insignificant, if you will. In terms of the size of our operations, they really range from 5 acres in total size of the entire farm up to 160 acres of the size of the entire farm. And the vegetable acreage ranged from a 1/4 acre market garden to a 6-acre market farm. Whereas you'll see here, we sort of broke them out into 2 groups, which is pretty common for people that do this kind of analysis, between market gardens and market farms. Market gardens being those that are up to 3 acres, market farms that do more than 3 acres of mixed vegetable. 11 of the 12 did have some off-farm income, and so they're not making their living at this, but certainly if you look at the numbers, some of the sales and revenue that they bring in are very important to their household income. And what we did see is they're all family-based, and there's various motivations for doing it. People aren't hiring a lot of people to work on their farms. First and foremost, we look at the market channel. Where are people selling their vegetables? 40%, if you look at the bottom, the red area on the pie chart, 40% of total sales were at farmers markets. 28%, next largest, were done through CSA shares. 17% were through wholesale, either to a broker or a wholesaler, but in our areas, primarily the different food hubs that operate in the region. And then there's a smaller amount, 7% at farm stands, pretty much nothing in terms of direct to grocery, but another 4% in terms of direct to restaurant. So this is where, as well as a slice, 4% if I'm reading it correctly, on direct to institution, someone selling directly to a school or selling directly to a hospital. And so this is just where vegetables were sold. The other enterprises were quite important. The big area, that 58%, one of our participants did dairy, and dairy was a much, much larger enterprise than the vegetable side of things. But we also see that 17% of total sales were meat sales, so people doing broilers or hogs, maybe direct marketing beef. 11% were these other farm-related income, so it might be research, might be organic cost share. It's also custom hire or land rent if somebody owns some land and they rented it out. And then the rest are kind of a mixed bag. The only other one that deserves mention is 7% were in fruits, whether tree fruits or soft fruits or small fruits like raspberries or strawberries. So this is kind of one of the main stories here in terms of the financial returns just to the mixed vegetable enterprises. If you see here that we have these broken out between market gardens and market farms by size, where generally the market gardens were a little more profitable on a per acre basis than the market farms. But again, generally on a small scale, people are working more intensively on a quarter acre than they are on using tractors and more machinery on 5 or 6 acres of vegetables. So there's kind of the major difference that we see in terms of the intensity on a per acre basis when you look at the small ones versus the big ones. Generally, just to give some highlights, for all farms there's an average of $9,300 in total sales per acre. But of course, total sales don't matter as much as, what do you make after you take out all of your expenses. So the next line is net cash income per acre. And this is what we're doing here is we're taking out all those cash expenses, seed and fertilizer, overhead expenses like utilities and all this stuff. Not depreciation in this instance, that's a non-cash expense, but all those cash expenses that people are spending in order to raise a crop and to do their enterprise. So with that, people are netting $4,100 on average with a gross margin of 45%. So what that means is for every dollar that they're earning, they're retaining 45 cents, right? And that's kind of what a gross margin is. In terms of average of all farms for net cash income per hour, seems a little depressing because people spend a lot of time doing this. It averaged out to $471 per hour. Fairly high depreciation per acre, so a net return after we take that depreciation out per acre about $2,200. Focusing in a little more on kind of returns to labor. Again, we look at this here in terms of total hours. Again, people are putting in a fair number of hours on a per acre basis, but you see there's quite a range, right? So if you just look at the market gardens, the range goes from 460 some hours for the season per acre up to 2,500. In terms of all farms, that's just for the entire season. That's not on a per acre basis. An average of about 1,600 hours for the season. So gross sales per hour look good, $10 an hour, but once you start taking out the expenses, it drops down to $471. So we have all this data, and I should note that all of this, the final report as a link is in the Moodle site, so you can dig into this as much as you want. There's even a real detailed appendix at the end that's broken up farm by farm, and you can just see how the different farms line up, as well as some real detailed averages and median measures across all those operations. Again, that's in the Moodle site, and please look at it, and because the point behind doing it is twofold. One, or threefold really to it. One, to assist those participants that are involved in the study. Two, to assist other operators in terms of looking at benchmarks, seeing how they compare, so that they have a sense of what they might do different in their business. And third, I really find we did this in order to be useful to those new and beginning growers who might just be looking for some basic numbers on, what do people earn on a mixed vegetable production. So if they're doing some real basic business planning at the front end, you just give them some good estimates to start working with. But I'm going to talk a little bit about applying these benchmarks if you're an existing operation. So two things that this might be helpful in addressing is, one, are your costs too high? We'll look at expenses. Are your revenues too low? Just to give people some sense. So in the report is a table about, I call them expense benchmarks that are on a per acre basis, the average and the median per acre. So you can see how much are people spending on chemicals or inputs on a per acre basis, fertilizer per acre, seeds and plants per acre, fuel per acre, and then if you have this same data, if you calculate on a per acre basis, it allows you to do a comparison. Am I higher or lower on fuel? Am I higher or lower on fertilizer? Am I higher or lower on my transportation expense in terms of how much I spend driving on and carting stuff around for sale? And so that spreadsheet there is a spreadsheet in Moodle where you can put in your own numbers, and it will do these calculations on a per acre basis for you. You say, I've got 4 acres of produce, of mixed produce, and these were my numbers from last year. And it will just do this comparison for you. It'll light up red if you're a little higher than this group, and green if you're lower than that benchmark. So the questions that people really ought to be asking themselves is, boy, if you end up being high in one of these measures, why is that? Just sort of think about that input a little bit better, or a little bit more, and just think, oh boy, is there maybe another way I can get this input or without compromising quality? Revenue benchmarks, like I said, it's $9,300 in sales per acre, the gross margin of 45%. Again, those are the sales retained after you take out those direct costs. One way that you might look at this is to take a look at the study in terms of how other people were selling their product, and ask yourself, boy, am I similar to them? How am I currently selling my product? Simply because that marketing mix usually has a big impact on how you're able to sell, as well as the prices you're able to get. If you're at sort of a quiet farmer's market where you can't really ask a good price, that might not be the best market channel for you. So you might really want to think through how you're selling your product. So if we're looking at scaling up, and after this, and then I'll be done and turn it over to Merritt, there's a couple things that come to my mind. If you're at the point where you're saying, I've done some of this commercially, I'd really like to take it up a notch. Some people use this term scaling up, in terms of growing their production in order to meet a demand. First and foremost that comes to my mind are your marketing costs. So sometimes when people are talking about scaling up, they say, boy, I do this one farmer's market, and maybe if I sell to this, I could get a bigger contract, or I could have more sales or move more product if I go into a wholesale market, or I go into some kind of bigger market or direct institution, I might have a bigger sale. And so the first thing really always comes to my mind are the marketing costs. What we saw in the research, about 29% of all the expenses of the 11 participants fell into these marketing-related costs. Travel, we spent a lot of time driving around, delivering vegetables, advertising, and dues, where dues is primarily farmers market dues. So if you're thinking about going wholesale, scaling up a little bit that way, you really want to strategically ask yourself, I might get a bigger sale, but is it also decreasing my marketing costs? Because oftentimes you get a lower price in a wholesale market, but if it's also decreasing your marketing costs significantly as well, it might pencil out to be just fine. But you need to really be clear about those marketing costs. If you're spending the same amount of time and travel to deliver wholesale that you are retail, you might as well sell retail and get a better price. So those are the kind of things you need to wrestle with. Second one is this issue about expanding. A lot of times people get in love with, buying new equipment and buying some new stuff that would help them scale up a little bit. Generally, I'd just say really think through those different capital investments, those capital costs you might take on. First and foremost is ask yourself if you can get a little more efficient with the equipment you already have. What we saw in our study is that there's a really low rate of return on assets. So what it tells you is that people have a lot of equipment on farm, and it's not really being put to as much work as it could. That is, there's excess capacity to grow more because people have the equipment to do it. They're just not putting it to work in a way that it's bringing them dollars back. And we always want to ask ourselves, especially if you're going to take on debt, would that new debt outweigh increase in sales for those new capital investments? So with that, some words of caution around scaling up and how to think it through. I'm going to get it over to Merritt unless there's some kind of questions that Ben has heard in the meantime.
Yep, Brian, we have one question from Chris Colson. He's wondering if you have any particulars strictly on fruit production. He is trying to switch over to fruit primarily. No, I don't, but one resource is, if you're familiar with Finbin, there's actually an online database where at least there's good numbers on strawberry production in Minnesota. I think your best resource for that is a man by the name of Thaddeus McCammett. He's with the Minskew campus, Central Lakes College in Brainerd. I'll put his name as well as a link to Finbin in the chat when we turn it over to Merritt. That's the best I got. I don't have that on fruit myself. Anything else? That's it for now. Chris says thank you. Great. Thanks, Chris. Merritt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Glad you could take a little time out to listen to these research results, which we find interesting and we hope useful. And we're just glad that other folks are taking an interest. And hopefully we'll all learn a little bit tonight. So we want to look at the economic impacts of local growers. And I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the economic models that Extension Community Economics, our shop, but other shops use as well to analyze the economic presence and impact of different agricultural operations. And what the questions that keep folks like Ryan and I awake at night, and I'll mention Bridget Tuck, who's our analyst for this project as well, our specialist who's really did a lot of the number crunching. Is the questions that keep us up at night, or do the models embrace what's really happening on the ground? When we take the input-output model, for example, is this accurately going to give us what's happening when we look on the ground in central Minnesota, small operations? And if not, how might we adjust the analysis model to more accurately reflect what's going on? So to get those measurements as accurate as possible. And then, we're going to compare the economic impact of small-scale local growers, again, in our study area, about 13 or 14 counties in central and west central Minnesota, with more conventional operations. So that'll be the focus. We'll talk about the models, and we'll talk about some of the outputs, some of what we learned from the research. Before we dive into that, I'd like you to just pull back off the planet a little bit and think about some recent research about local fresh foods, local and fresh foods. And this is mostly coming out of USDA, but a few big takeaways from 2015. Consumer perspectives and preferences are changing, and that demand is driving changes in the food markets and in the grocery markets. Local foods as a percentage of all U.S. food, I mean, barely it didn't even make 2%. I have 2% on my slide, 1.9% in 2008, but a replicated study in 2012 showed that the presence of local food sales as a percent of all U.S. food sales was up to 8% by 2012. That's a very large increase in a short amount of time, in just 4 years. Much of that increase, the researchers who looked at this, they look at market mechanisms like food hubs as having a lot to do with that big growth versus the more direct-to-market sales of farm markets, et cetera. And then the other piece, and again, driven by consumers, the grocery stores are restructuring. The use of the traditional supermarket is way down. If you look at the last 10 years, it's dropped from somewhere in the 80 percentile down to the 50 percentile. And the fresh market model, like Whole Foods, and you've seen other examples even of our more mainstream, what we think of as our traditional grocery markets, even trying to look for like a fresh foods market and moving in that direction. So these are some of the big trends that are going on in the U.S. related to local and fresh foods. And that's just for context. We talk a little bit about analyzing economic impact, and that's part of what we tried to do with the study. You know, we use regional economic analysis models. Some of them are more powerful than others. Probably the biggest one, the one we like the most, is this input-output model. And what that does is it sets up basically county by county a model of the economy that looks at the flow of goods and services going through it. And in this case, we looked at multiple counties, the 13 or 14 counties in our study. And it looks at the intermediate goods and services for each industry, and then takes related value added to come up with total output. Looking at agriculture as an example, intermediate inputs would include seeds and animal feed, fertilizer applications, land rentals. And then value added includes, and a big part of it is the labor needed to produce the item along with taxes and some other property income. So this model really tries to build, literally build a model of these transactions happening out in the economy. It looks at direct impacts, and that's your spending for local food purchases, and then at indirect impacts, and that's where all those inputs come in, you know, that local growers use to support those direct impacts. And then as induced impacts is the, you know, what do you do when you go spend your money because you made it, you know, X number of dollars per acre on your enterprise, and you bring that back into your local economy. So that's, I mean, that's the basic model that we use. The unfortunate part, and this is again what keeps us up at night, is that the standard input-output model is the green giant system. We've all kind of lived, at least in part in that system. Me too. You know, I go to Cub Foods and I pick up a bag of frozen peas and I take it back and I throw it in my chicken curry. That's the green giant system. It's from California, it's from Mexico. And the model, the way the input-output model has been built, is really designed around that. And the small local growers are just thrown into that system and sort of dragged along. It is, in fact, the way that most food gets sold. But that's the question that we really got down to was how might we adjust the input-output model in order to more accurately reflect the purchasing and sales behaviors of local small-scale growers. And at Cornell University, we totally stole some of their ideas about how to do that. How do we upgrade? How do we improve that input-output model to really make it a more of a, to take a closer look at what's happening locally? And here's some of what we learned. I mean, here's some of the big takeaways of small farm impacts in our central and central west part of Minnesota. Small farms return 232,000 plus more to the local economy for $1 million of output. And then output is, you know, all those intermediate goods and services plus the value added and the labor, et cetera. But, you know, the return from small farms when there's $1 million in ag output is larger than conventional agriculture. In this case, conventional agriculture, and pop in here, Ryan, if I'm not getting this right, conventional agriculture is everything but the small local growers, the sort of folks who were in our study. So it's just all the other agricultural operators out there on the landscape in central and west Minnesota. For every $1 million in output that a small farm produces, there's an additional $600,000 for the local economy that gets contributed to the local economy. Whereas if you spend $1 million in output via conventional agriculture, the contribution is under $400,000. So showing a real difference here in the impacts and contribution, the presence of what small-scale vegetable farms can do within our study area. The total impact of and Ryan had mentioned before, there were 11 operations in our study, but there were an estimated 65 small-scale operations, vegetable operations in our study area. They bring in an estimated over $1 million in wage and prior income and support well over 100 jobs. Those are, I've got to be clear, the model counts both part-time and full-time jobs. So not all of those are, 40-hour-a-week kind of enterprises. And if you're a market gardener, you understand that 40 hours a week is not how it really happens. One of the things that we asked our study participants is how much of your inputs do you buy locally, right? And then we compared that via the national input-output model with conventional agriculture. But you can see that local food enterprises are generally, not across the board, but generally more likely to be tapping local goods and services as inputs to their vegetable production. So that's pretty meaningful. Some of these, you take with a grain of salt because educational services, might not add up to very many dollars across the board, and if we're dividing it into a 23 and a 70. But pretty interesting, and obviously local foods operators are big users of local inputs. This is a summary of the takeaways that I talked about before, but you can see that the direct impact, the indirect and induced impact, and then a combined 1.6 million for local foods, combined 1.4 million, let's call it, for conventional agriculture. A lot more jobs, albeit part-time and full-time jobs, created through local food production than through conventional agriculture, where labor is almost by design not as necessary to production. And on the labor income, you can see the differences there. Fairly close when you look at overall labor income. So we developed a few pieces here of business development resources for your smaller enterprises. And one would be join the study. We're going to be doing this for at least another year. If you want to learn your benchmarks for your operation, contact Ryan. We'll have the contact information at the end of the slides tonight. Contact Ryan if you want to be part of this benchmarking study and get your comparisons in and see what you can learn comparing your operations with others in central and west central Minnesota. There's always the importance of a good plan. If you're going to scale up, or if you're thinking about even just getting started, putting a good plan together is a useful resource for you. Small Business Development Center and some of the counties are affiliated with SBDC. That's a resource for you. The Small Farm Business Planning that was part of, I think, an earlier session in this series, but has been offered through other venues. That's via Ryan as well. He's, as he says, omnipresent, involved in everything related to small-scale agriculture. And then Building a Sustainable Business, that's part of the U of M. we'll put links to all of these resources we're mentioning, so you can go straight to the source, contact somebody to follow up and make an appointment or learn more about a potential resource. But all of it, everything I'm mentioning here, we'll make available to you as a specific link and a resource person to talk to. Other business development resources for small-scale enterprises is Scale Up with Financing. There are a number of different smaller-scale lending programs and grant programs. USDA, through the Farm Services Agency, has a microloan program. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has a pilot ag microloan program, and also a sustainable ag demonstration grant. That's where you do something unique on your farm or garden enterprise, and then you share what you've learned. They fund you with the grant, but then you also share what you've learned through that process with other operators. It's a great education process and also a way to do some innovative things in sustainable agriculture and gardening. You can also check with your county and your regional economic development shops for more info about specific programs. The other one I'll mention is AgStar, which has also has a young beginning farmer loan program where they try to work with you to get you going. And AgStar is more of a private shop, but I'll also put that information in with the other resources that I'm mentioning here. Yeah, Ryan's going to talk a little bit. I mean, another small enterprise financing tool is crowdsourcing via online platforms like Kickstarter. And Ryan has some experience with that, so I'm going to sort of transfer things over to him. And I'm finding him in here. Oh, he's an attendee, that's why. Let me see here. Ryan, I can't get that thing down to you. Can you still talk? Oh, you got it. Good. Good job.
Yeah, there we go. Very good.
Alrighty.
Yeah, so it seems as we were talking about financing, it might be good for me to chime in about this Kickstarter project we did for our winter greenhouse here in 2014. So if you're at the Sustainable Farming Association conference, you already heard me yap about this on a panel, but I'm guessing a lot of you weren't there, or maybe you weren't there, so might as well throw it out there. So this is an example of what we had done in order to help fund what was at that time a pretty expensive project, a little over $30,000 to get this winter greenhouse, root cellar, apprentice cabin, I call it the complex, put together. And so we actually did a Kickstarter campaign, which seemed to work really well for a project like that that we were working on. When thinking about Kickstarter and where it might fit in, or other crowdsourcing options, they work kind of a similar way. I really think you want to think about what is something that you're doing that's an honest-to-goodness project. Doesn't seem to work very well for, hey, I'm starting a business, so give me some money so I start a business. If you can turn something into a project, it works pretty well. That is, has a beginning, it has an end. I also think if it's a project that has maybe it's a little higher mission, or that it's a little bit kind of innovative or creative, that seems to lend itself well to a Kickstarter campaign or a crowdfunding campaign as well, because it kind of captures people's imagination. And so, I'm happy to talk about how this all worked out for our end in the question and answer, but generally we raised a little over $8,000 through this Kickstarter campaign. And as you see here, 74 different backers. Some of them from Switzerland and stuff like that, but most of them actually were our existing CSA customers, and this is a nice avenue for them to support us and support this project. In return for what I think were some pretty good rewards for being a backer as well. So a lot of people signed up for winter CSA shares, things like that. So now you have to ask Merritt and I tough questions.
All right, thanks, Ron, and thanks, Merritt. Attendees, feel free to unmute yourselves if you would like and ask your question verbally, or you can also type them in the chat. Ryan, we have one question. How many in your research were organic farms?
2 of the 11 were certified organic farms. Which of course, you know, we had a request that we should maybe split that out. But again, with this confidentiality thing, there aren't that many certified organic farms in central Minnesota. By outing them, we would have maybe outed who they are. But 2 of the 11 are certified. Although I should note that of the other ones, you know, pretty much everybody was in the same camp since they direct marketed, that they didn't use chemicals, but they weren't certified, you know. So they use, a lot of people use organic method. A lot of people used manures, didn't use any kind of insecticides or pesticides, but they might have used maybe a more conventional soil mix or a more conventional fertilizer, but you know, definitely not in terms of no pesticides. I think was pretty much the case across the board.
Thank you, and thank you to Peter for asking the question. Are there any other questions? Peter had a comment that the inputs looked low because of not being organic. Any reaction to that?
Yeah, you know, I don't see, I mean, you can look at, one place we're going to see a lot of difference in organic is on seed costs, simply because you're using certified organic seed. That's typically something that will stand out if you had a comparison of organic certified versus non-certified. What should be taken into consideration is that it's the scale, really. I mean, yeah, we look at fertilizers, you know, $60 on a per acre basis. I don't know if that might be a little low. I mean, if you were doing straight up Midwestern bioag fertilizer, but again, that's the average, right? So no, I don't know. I mean, yes, you typically have higher inputs, but it's really not across the board, organic versus non-organic. Certain things that stick out. We just presented the average, so it would hide that.
Thank you. Kathy Schaefer is wondering if you have any stats on UPIC enterprises.
We don't have any stats on UPIC. Again, especially if we're talking UPIC strawberries. I hope you sent that. Did you put that in the public chat, Ben? The thing about Thaddeus McCammon?
Yep, I put his contact info in there.
Okay, yeah, he is the guy. So especially, I mean, probably the most popular UPIC situation is UPIC strawberries. Not a lot of people are doing UPIC cabbage operations. Thaddeus is really the fruit guy, and he knows these numbers really well, how UPIC would compare to marketing another way. Generally speaking, I would think that you're going to have this much lower marketing cost on a UPIC situation. Just to reflect on a little bit, if you notice what I pointed out there, 29, almost 30% of all the expenses for these mixed vegetable operations were on marketing costs. So there is a fair amount of cost incurred, especially in transportation of moving this stuff all around the place. So what we do is we have farms with a lot of multiple marketing channels, which is good for profitability, because if you raise a pepper, you can find a place to sell the pepper, right? But by having multiple marketing channels, you're also driving from 2 to 3 different farmers markets, or you're delivering CSA shares on one day and you're going to a farmer's market another day. And so all of this travel really adds up, and that is the largest expense if my memory serves me correctly, across all the input expenses, traveling, and transportation. And that's, so with the U-pick, you're taking that out of the equation, right? You're taking 30% of the expenses out of the equation, if you want to think of it that way, or use this as a benchmark.
Thank you. Doug Thompson is wondering what the range of products was produced by these small farms.
You know, pretty much everybody had a wide mix. There were 2 or 3 that really, over the years, have kind of decreased their mix, their product mix. But pretty much everybody were raising what I'll call the staples, right? Potatoes, tomatoes, lettuce, peppers, onions, right? Think of the staples. But most of them did well beyond the staples. You know, there are some of the smaller farms, less than an acre, they're doing, you know, Asian greens and specialty greens and, you know, garlic and specialty different types of onions. So they didn't just do like standard sweet onions or yellow onions. You know, they did, you know, 6 to 12 different varieties of onions. Wide variety of tomatoes. It wouldn't be uncommon talking to our participants that like, oh yeah, you know, we do 12, 20 different varieties of tomatoes. So this mixed vegetable production, everybody had the standards. Some only did the standards, but most of them did a very wide range. What's important to note is that you saw about 28% of the sales came from CSA shares. Pretty much anybody that does a CSA is going to do a very wide mix in order to make a box interesting. And so that wasn't everybody by any means. I think maybe 5 of the 11 were CSA operations. I mean, so they had to have a very wide mix.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for either Ryan or Merritt? Feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them. Doug had a follow-up question. Was there any indication that the more unusual specialties were more profitable than the staple products?
No, I really didn't get into that kind of specifics, Doug, really. You know, we're kind of at this whole big picture of people's farm finances. I think what you did see is that some of the most profitable farms, and you can look at this in the report, you can tease out of the report, the most profitable farms of the 11 had a bigger mix of enterprises and a bigger mix of marketing channels. That makes sense. And it does make sense, right? Because if you're, say, a farm and then you only sell to one farmer's market, that's your only shot of selling the product that you're raising, right? And so you run a greater risk of spending time, money, and effort to raise a product, and you can't sell it all, right? So if you had 2 outlets or 3 outlets, you have a greater chance of getting the products that you're raising sold. And so whether it's the standards or a mix of the standards and kind of these specialty things, it kind of matters, I think, more on the marketing channel that you're going into. If you're going to a kind of a well-developed farmer's market, I think you can really do a standout good job by standing out with some specialty things. And heck, even if you don't even sell some of the specialty things, you just do a few of them, it attracts people to your stand, right? And that's sort of more of a merchandising thing. And certainly you can ask for a higher price, in large part because people don't really know what, you know, a 5-ounce clamshell of baby kale sells for. I don't know, what does it sell for? But they probably would know what a head of green leaf lettuce sells for. So there's kind of, at this scale that we're looking at, probably not a lot of details on you, specialty versus standards. But once you get into the details, that's where it's going to make a difference. I call that sort of the fine-tuning of your product mix that really makes a difference. If you're at a kind of a real small or lazy farmer's market, you might be wasting your time by doing a lot of specialty stuff because you might not just have the market. You might not have that group of people that are most interested in buying that kind of stuff. And that's the biggest word of caution. It's not a slam dunk saying, hey, I got interesting specialty stuff, so it's going to sell.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we wrap up as we're getting close to 7 o'clock? Feel free to type them in the chat or ask them yourself.
So if there aren't any more, I just maybe in closing, we did get some of those links to the study itself posted in Moodle, and a few other kind of resource links that are posted there as well. And certainly our contact information here is on this slide, both Merritt and myself. And if you had any other kind of further questions or you wanted to follow up, you want to get involved in the study, if you're in this 13 county central region, get a hold of myself or Merritt, and we'll just kind of go from there and kind of help you in what way we can.
Thanks, Ryan. Merritt, do you have any closing remarks?
Nope, just what Ryan mentioned, we'll follow up with those financing and planning resource links, make sure you're able to get to any of the resources that we mentioned. And it maybe be good to put the counties included in the study up somewhere on that Moodle site as well.
All right, thank you. We'll get that up. Well, I will thank Ryan and Merritt, our community economics educators and presenters tonight again for their work and their time with us tonight. Thank you all also to all the participants. We appreciate you joining in. A reminder, we have our 8th and final session of our local foods college this year, next Tuesday, March 1st. We are starting an hour earlier with it being caucus night in Minnesota. So that session will be at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock. Reminder also that all the sessions for this year and the previous 4 years have all been recorded online, so you can view them at any point. And I would also like to thank Karen and Linda and Anna and the rest of the local foods college team for helping us get set up tonight. Good night, everybody.